When you're moving money, speed should not be your friend. It's okay to trust and you should trust, but you don't necessarily have to do things in seconds or minutes. Can it take an hour? Can it take a couple hours? Can you do some research and validate that what you're about to do?
Welcome to Markets Plus, where leading experts from across BMO discuss factors shaping the markets, economy, industry sectors, and much more. Visit bmocm.com/markets plus for more episodes. The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Tascona, and I lead the North American Treasury and Payment Solutions Product Management at BMO Financial Group. Something that all our clients have in common is having to manage their fraud risk. For example, 80% of organizations have been targets of payments fraud in 2023, a 15 percentage point increase from the previous year, according to a recent report from the Association of Financial Professionals. With me today to explore the latest trends in corporate fraud and to discuss practical steps companies can take to protect themselves is Larry Zelvin, my colleague, who is the head of BMO Financial Crime Unit. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's great to be with you and everyone else, particularly as this is Fraud Month. So let me give you some sense of the types of frauds we're seeing, particularly that companies are facing. And look, it's ever changing. So what's happening today could change tomorrow, next month, or next quarter. Do realize that these fraudsters, this is how they make their living. So as we close doors, they find other doors to open and walk through them. But look, one of the most prevalent things we're seeing right now is something called business email compromise. And it's just a fancy name to say that there's somebody emailing you, but they also text and sometimes call you and pretend to be somebody that they're not. It could be the CEO, it could be the chief financial officer, it could be a client or customer. At the end of the day, they are pretending and trying to build credibility to commit fraud against you. So you need to be alert and watching who you're engaging with. And if there's anything that doesn't seem right, you probably want to think about what you're going to do. We're also seeing, believe it or not, a lot of check fraud. What is old is new again. You're seeing a lot of, unfortunately, postal workers being robbed, sometimes at gunpoint. They're not after a single parcel of mail, but rather a bag full of mail. And then they'll find checks. They will use chemicals to treat them to recreate who the deposit is going to and potentially the amount. And it looks legitimate, and off you go. And somebody has now stolen money through checks. We're seeing a lot of deposit frauds. Happens when a customer creates credit to an account knowing that the funds won't be honored, but then uses the funds to deposit the returns. And then two last ones, if I may, wire fraud. That's happening both online and also in person. And then maybe folks have seen recently there was a 1.5 billion with a B fraud in the crypto space. Crypto is a big area that we're seeing a ton of frauds. So if folks are working in those investment areas, they really need to be careful.
When we talk about this fraud, I think it's important, Larry, that we pause and say, who typically are the bad actors? Who's doing this fraud? And are there some industries or corporate functions that are more vulnerable than others?
Yeah, as far as who's doing it, basically there's five groups that really come to mind. First is nation states. I will tell you, in the crypto area, North Korea is really a big actor, and we believe they're the ones that did the 1.5 billion. Look, the sanctions are working, and North Korea wants money not only to build its economy but also to build its national security desires. We're seeing a lot of frauds coming from Asia. Unfortunately, people are being lured into what they think are information technology jobs, only to be imprisoned and being forced to commit fraud. So a lot of times, unfortunately, as you're getting these texts, these emails, and these phone calls, they're coming from people who are actually enslaved, modern day slavery. And this is happening by the hundreds of thousands. It's in Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, just to name a few. Then you get into people who are just trying to make money the old fashioned way. They're stealing it. We really saw a huge rise in fraud after COVID. A lot of people took the opportunity while at home to take advantage of that. And I think a lot of folks are continuing down that path. So you have nation states, you have criminal groups, then you have hacktivists, people for a variety of causes. And obviously things are polarized on both sides of the pendulum, if you will. And money is not flowing in certain areas as much as they have. And so you may have radicalized people, and I'm not being political here, that are looking for funds to continue to carry their cause forward and maybe push now to do things more of a criminal aspect to try and get their word out. The next group, terrorists, again, they are being heavily impacted by sanctions, and that's how they get rid of it. And then the greatest actors we worry about are actually insiders. It is really hard when somebody you trust betrays that trust. So those are the groups. And then, when you look at the industries, Rebecca, it really is agnostic. If you're connected to an internet or a cell tower, you're going to be impacted by fraud in some way.
And I would say, I mean, you've seen so many different types given your role. You're an expert in this space, but not everyone obviously has this level of expertise. And often people don't think it's going to happen to them. So what I'd like to do now is to zero in on what can finance teams do to prevent fraud from happening in their organization. Really practical steps that you would recommend a company take based on what you've seen. And let's take business email compromise as an example. We talk a lot about employees of a company being the first line of defense for their organization when it comes to fraud. What are those practical steps for them to take to minimize the risk of a compromise?
Rebecca, I'll tell you, whether you're representing a company, your family, or yourself, I think the risks are the same. And I'll tell you what I'm about to share with you is similar, if not the same, with each of these groups. Obviously, some of this is going to be more business focused. But the biggest thing, and this is the most important thing, and I've even had this conversation with my own family, and I will share a story where I was recently a victim of fraud. But the biggest thing is you've got to slow down. People have this sense of urgency, and particularly with younger folks. You've got to be careful. I will tell you, my own adult children, I think they'll click on anything or open any attachment. QR codes are really becoming a fraudster's favorite thing because people will just scan it and then click away without actually checking the website. So really slow down. Be aware of the threats. Look at those emails and URLs carefully. And if you see a small difference, something doesn't look right, you need to just stop. Do know that when you're moving money, speed should not be your friend. It's okay to trust and you should trust, but you don't necessarily have to do things in seconds or minutes. Can it take an hour? Can it take a couple hours? Can you do some research and validate that what you're about to do? Be very careful on what you post on social media, particularly those that are sensitive or who are in sensitive or financial related roles. You're going to be the targets. People will use things like LinkedIn and other announcements and go, wow, this person has the access I'm looking for. So be careful of how you advertise yourself to the world. I would say establish a callback process for any changes to payments, banking information, shipping details, account numbers, particularly when you use electronic instructions. Adopt external controls. If you're moving big money, such as a secondary improver, you may want to come up with passwords or code words that only you and another individual knows. Make sure it's nothing like a date of birth or something that can be found on the internet, but rather something more obscure that only the two of you may know and can trust. You need to think about when the fraud happens. What are you going to do and how are you going to make it happen? As Rebecca mentioned, I do lead a large fraud organization. I've been in security for a long time. And I will tell you, for us to help you, the sooner you tell us, the better. Then the last thing I would say is just really have processes and procedures with the vendors whom you do business, look at who has what privileges, and then look at where you're conducting this work and make sure they have a viable security and fraud program. You don't want to find out after the fact that they may not be up to the standards that you would expect and want. Rebecca, let me turn to you now. Your clients' functions within their organizations make them vulnerable to be targeted by fraudsters. When you speak to our clients, where are you finding areas to strengthen preventative actions and perhaps fill knowledge gaps?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. And I think a lot of the advice that we give to clients, and our clients tend to be business banking clients, smaller entrepreneurs, all the way up to large, Fortune 500 companies. So they really span the gamut, but the advice is really the same. And it's really about making sure that you spend time just as much as you would on your, product innovation and client servicing on making sure you have a robust fraud program. It's really focused on the three things that we tell our clients: people, process, and technology. From a people perspective, I mean, it's really what you said. One of the most important things you can do today with your teams is making sure you're educating them. And we try to boil it down to a best practice. Anytime a request comes to them, either it's an email or through phone, make sure that they're stopping, they're verifying that the actual request is legitimate, and that the person or whoever's on the other end of that request is also legitimate. Whenever in doubt, stop. Don't be rushed into a mistake. Unfortunately, we see that happen time and time again. An employee may think that they're doing a favor to another, senior leader, and it turns out that the request didn't actually come from a senior leader. It's been business email compromise, and it's come from, a fraudster. So we really encourage our clients to take a moment to train their folks to verify any information in emails, URLs, or callback, and confirm that those requests are with the right people. We also encourage them to make sure that they have regular discussions with their teams about fraud. An email bulletin is simply not enough. The way that the world is changing around us, they have to get in a room, they have to train, they have to talk about it openly, and then keep repeating because, as you know, new people join the organization all the time. Training is also critical, especially for those employees that work with Treasury systems. And if they're responsible for payments going out, making sure that they're having annual refresh of the latest fraud prevention tactics. You mentioned making sure that there's a playbook. We couldn't stress this enough. Like, no one wants to think that fraud may happen, but it may happen. And so what does happen if fraud occurs within your organization? Do you have that playbook that's going to allow you to respond very quickly? And if you don't, I'd encourage our clients to talk with their BMO relationship manager, but as we do have many fraud prevention resources and tools embedded in our Treasury and payment solutions capabilities that could help them very simply reconcile from a process perspective. If you catch an issue at month end, it's likely too late. So we strongly encourage vigilance around reconciliation. It can be your friend. And a very simple thing as well is to make sure that you have dual controls and separation of duties for employees between those that initiate payment activities and those that approve it. Very important. And if in inch of a doubt, take time to pick up the phone and make sure that the request is legitimate. And I'm certainly not a CIO, but we do know that investing in your fraud capabilities from a technology perspective is a good investment. Antivirus softwares, enhancing your ability to monitor for any unusual behavior in your systems, and scanning your systems for vulnerabilities. So that's really what we advise our clients on, and it's very aligned with what you're suggesting as well. Larry, we work very closely with treasurers, CFOs across many different organizations in North America and many different organization sizes. What have you found to be the most effective tools and resources to help treasurers with fraud prevention?
One of the most important things, Rebecca, is this really just awareness. After the 9/11 attacks, there was a saying that came out to help people understand their role in counterterrorism. It was just simply, if you see something, say something. And it seems so basic and so kind of almost goofy, but it did help save lives. It did prevent terrorist attacks. I think it is just really useful for people to have a conversation and understanding that fraud is highly prevalent. It is happening all over the place. And when they see something, they need to slow down and then they should report it to their security folks. It's not an eloquent phrase, and maybe we'll come up with one someday, but I hope that the concept resonates as far as what is the best thing to do when it comes to fraud. But there are other things, such as ensure your processes and procedures are in place and being followed when processing any account or payment changes. Consider using multiple layers of approvals for large transactions. Clearly define trusted and verified communication channels, processes, and protocols when communicating sensitive information such as financial transactions or the release of critical data. Ensure your access controls are defended against to the best of your ability. Deep fakes. We can talk about AI and that, there is multi-factor authentication and one-time passwords and biometrics. I'm a big fan of biometrics. Passwords, unfortunately, are being guessed. I also work in cybersecurity. There's a new saying, why hack in when you can log in? So people have to be very, very careful about protecting their passwords and using them across multiple accounts. And then lastly, I'd just say stay informed of new and emerging threats. As I had said earlier, the fraudsters will continue to use avenues that work for them, but as soon as they are closed down, they'll find other avenues. So it's not a one and done kind of risk that you have to manage. You really do need to stay on top of it and change your tactics as they do.
And I guess the reason for that, Larry, is because as companies get smarter about their controls, then the fraudsters are looking for different ways to get in because we've closed one door. So always stay vigilant. And I guess the spirit of continuous learning and continuous improving your controls is the theme. We talked about fraud prevention being critical, but if a fraud event does occur, Larry, what would you say are the most important actions for treasurers to take immediately?
Sure. Let's just talk about BMO and how you can interact with us. Because look, each incident is unique and the type of response will vary depending on the fraud that's occurred. However, there's essential guidance that kind of works across the landscape. First, get all the relevant information. Make sure you have the account number, the dates, the times. If you have email addresses, anything you can pass us, all that helps us as we figure out what happened and how do we go about recovering your money and then hopefully shutting the bad actors down. Contact your BMO relationship team, client service team, or help desk. They will collect information, start investigation and recovery process when applicable, and provide guidance. If your systems are potentially compromised, request that your OLBB access be temporarily locked and contact your local cybersecurity professionals if you have one. If not, there are others out there you can search for. Be careful of if it's too cheap and too good to be true. Sometimes those are not the best folks. And also, we have something, if you go bmo.com/security, we provide a lot of guidance on what you can do as far as cybersecurity, fraud, and also physical security. So I'd recommend if you have a chance, go check out that website. If your OLBB account has unauthorized action or a transaction or is compromised, please let your BMO representative know as soon as possible. If you're inclined, and I'd really encourage you to file a police report. If you are Canadian, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, I really encourage you to file with them. Do it electronically. The phones can be somewhat slow. And then in the United States, there are a number of federal agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission, the FBI, among others. Lastly, I'd say look at your insurer, see if there's any potential there, and then again, let your BMO representative know where you're at and where we can help. Rebecca, I'm sure your experience working with finance departments, you've come across companies that had breaches. Are there lessons that you draw based on what you've seen?
Larry, I would say there's kind of two things that we would advise clients on based on their experiences. One would be speed is your friend and planning ahead to prepare for, something that we don't want to happen, but could happen, which would be a breach. So act quickly. The sooner that fraud is identified, the better for your organization. Have a response team. So think about who are the right internal and external providers that can help if there ever is a breach. Write that down. Make sure that your employees that need to know that. Public relations, IT, internal communications, etc. And then communications. Think about if there ever was a breach, who would you need to communicate to? Your employees, regulators, law enforcement, news media, and others. How would you manage that? Do you need help to manage through something like that? And then all this culminates in building a playbook on how would you respond to a fraud event quickly and efficiently. This is not something you want to be reacting to without a playbook. If it ever happens to you, having a playbook and understanding those key steps is going to be very helpful if you ever have to deal with a breach. Write it down, write the procedures down, and practice them to ensure your teams are well aware of them. Now, Larry, some companies in the US and Canada may be looking at diversifying their suppliers, particularly in the current uncertain trade policy environment. What are some of those best practices for risk controls as companies consider making changes to their suppliers?
Yeah, Rebecca, I'll tell you, when it comes to third-party supply chain, that is one of the most difficult problems in all of cybersecurity. You really can't assess with a high level of confidence the security readiness, the albeit cyber fraud or physical, of the folks that you may be doing business with, that you may have as critical vendors. And look, you're only as strong as your weakest link, which includes your suppliers. I think it's important to have a conversation. If you have security professionals, let them continue to do their job and hopefully give you the confidence you need. If you're a small or medium-sized business, or even as an individual, you probably want to ask some basic questions. And you may not be a technologist, you may not be a cybersecurity person, you may not even be a security person, but you may want to ask things such as, do you have a chief information security officer? Have you done an outside cybersecurity or fraud assessment? When was the last time you had a breach? If there was a breach, what would you do? These questions are simple. You can Google them or use other internet search engines to find out. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting the right answers to simple questions, that should be a huge flag and maybe have you think on, is this somebody you want to do business with, or is this somebody you should have trust and confidence, particularly within your finances? So, Rebecca, you're on the front line supporting our clients. Imagine there's currently a lot of uncertainty about the international trade environment. What's been your approach to supporting their concerns on supply chain diversity?
Well, thanks, Larry, for that question. I would say, first and foremost, it's a very fluid environment. I would say we are advising clients about being proactive, not only about managing their currency exposure in trade finance, but also thinking about just basic best practices for fraud prevention if they are going to change any of the ways that they make payments out of their organization. And sometimes that does involve their supply chain. Really, it comes down to making sure you leverage those bread and butter best practices that actually exist, for example, within BMO's online banking for business platform. So we have alerts that are built in that can help prompt someone if there's large transactions that are happening and helps them review their transactions regularly. If you do not have those alerts set up, then we would strongly recommend that you do. We also advise clients to use those admin reporting functions that exist within OLBB Online Banking for Business. It allows those administrators of your programs to review the user permissions, their limits, change them as they see appropriate. We've talked about ensuring segregation of duty controls. Can't overemphasize that enough. But you can also actually get one layer below and introduce approvals on specific payment templates. It's all about making sure that you're taking advantage of all of the controls that exist within the OLBB ecosystem to prevent and protect the organization. Now, Larry, artificial intelligence and Gen AI are on the minds of a lot of us lately. In light of these innovations, how do you see fraud threats to organizations evolving over the next few years?
Yeah, look, you can't talk about security or technology and not say artificial intelligence or Gen AI. And look, I think there is both good and bad, a yin and a yang. And we're going to just talk about the yang because of the security concerns. There are two things that are really on mind from a security professional's standpoint. The first in my mind is the ability to be somebody or not, that impersonation aspect. And the other one is lowering the bar to committing actually security threats and risks. So let me talk about the impersonations. There is both video and voice. I will tell you, just in the last few weeks, I saw two videos that I would have swore were the people that they were portraying, and they were not. I was completely duped. It is getting that good. On the audio, same thing. It is next to impossible to tell who is the person that you think you're speaking to, vis-a-vis perhaps someone who is a fraudster. So you've got to be very careful and have a higher sense of awareness. And I will tell you that conversations are fine up until the point you're about to transfer money. Some of the things you need to be aware of. One is there's a great sense of urgency. They're really pushing you to do something. Be careful of things that really go after your emotions, like there's a loved one or somebody you care about, or potentially also a job that is driving the sense of urgency. If you're about to get control of your computer or your device and it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. If somebody asks you for your password or one-time password or anything else that gives you that secondary authority, even though it sounds and looks like somebody who has authority, be very, very careful, be very cautious. Again, slow down, think about it. Hopefully, there's no rush on this stuff. I'd love to tell you there's a technology out there that'll detect this for you. I regret there isn't. So you're just going to have to be very careful. When it comes to lowering the bar, we're seeing the number of attacks increase across cyber and fraud because people don't need the technology skill. There was over the last few years what we call cyber as a service. So people who would go out there, you pay them and they go do cyber attacks for you. Now, because of AI, you can actually do that yourself. So I think the risk will continue to go up. But the good news is that our controls, they're adapting as well, but it's going to be this tit for tat for quite some time. You don't want to be that person who's going to be taken over. So again, be highly careful, be highly critical. And if you make an error, report it as quickly as you can, get others involved. So hopefully you can minimize the impacts, if not negate them completely.
Thanks so much, Larry. This has been a really insightful conversation. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the one thing I see time and time again is unfortunately people who have been victimized feeling guilty. So those who have been harmed feel like they're the ones who have inflicted harm. This is particularly, you see this with younger folks, adolescents, and also with the elderly, right? They've been a victim of fraud. They may not want to tell their parents or their caregivers. They may not want to tell their children or the people looking after them because they're going to be criticized for, oh my gosh, how could you do this? How did you let that happen? At the end of the day, folks, it's best to go, look, I was a victim of this. I need help. Let me share a story. I've been in security for most of my adult life. You can't see me, but I will tell you it's a few decades now. Not too long ago, I went to an ATM machine in my neighborhood. I put my card in, I got my money out, everything was fantastic. 2 or 3 days later, I get a text saying, hey, did you just withdraw $300 from the ATM? I said, I did not. They said, thank you. We're freezing your card and thank you for letting us know. The next day, I looked at my account. I had $6,000 that was taken out of my account using an ATM skimmer in less than 24 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking to you about fraud and security. I am an expert in this field, so many think, and I lost thousands of dollars at an ATM because I didn't take the time to see if there's a scammer. I should know better, but I didn't. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if there's a whole lot of folks that would have been able to prevent it. So if I can be a victim of it, so can you. If I can confess, and I do this for a living, I hope so can you.
Okay, Larry, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your own story. If it can happen to you, then, it can happen to many other people. I was wondering, and by the way, I'm sorry that did happen to you. I was wondering if you could also just share some advice to treasurers and CFOs as they're educating their own employees about fraud prevention. Along the same lines, like if their employees suspect that there has been a fraud, really encouraging an open environment where they speak up so that pace and speed can be their friend.
Sure. Like I think showing maturity of an organization is understanding that these risks can actually impact you, that there's no such thing as perfect security. It just doesn't exist. And it can happen to anyone. But when it does happen, or there's a suspicion of it, that you report it to the right experts within your organization. That could be your security team. It could be your legal team. It could be your risk team. But folks, at the end of the day, you need to report it because here's the thing. It may have occurred in other places. The bad actor may have other accesses that you really don't know about. It needs to be investigated and adjudicated. The risks are not only monetarily, but there's also reputational risk. There is legal risk. There is compliance risk. All these things need to be accounted for. So you need to bring those experts in so they can assess and make the proper reporting. Or in some cases, we have to notify the victims if there are victims. So at the end of the day, folks, even though you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I had this happen to me. Oh my gosh, I may get in trouble. It gets far worse if you don't report it. There's nothing more frustrating than, oh my gosh, this thing happened 3 days ago and I've been thinking about it and I think I need to tell someone. Folks, as soon as you see something, say something.
Okay, well, thanks so much for that, Larry. And I feel myself better prepared. And hopefully our clients also can take a few tangible tips from this conversation. Thank you for your time, Larry. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening. You can follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. For more episodes, visit bmocm.com/marketsplus.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.